62% want to suppress free speech to stop causing offence to religions. 1/3 of young British Muslims, 16 to 24, believe you should be put to death for apostasy, for leaving the faith. But we have honour killings, forced marriage, cousin marriage, child marriage, polygamy. These are all things people are afraid to address because of the issue of Islamophobia.
I'm Emma Trimble and this is GBN Originals. This is going to be one hell of a spicy debate. I'm joined by historian and NCF Senior Fellow Rafe Heydel-Mankoo and political commentator Fahima Mahmood. Is Britain a Christian country? Let's take a look at this.
Represent कर रही हूँ अपने पाकिस्तानी सारी आवाम को, पाकिस्तानी मुसलमान औरतों को.
Now I'll read you out what she says. I'm representing my Pakistani nation and Pakistani Muslim women. I'm very proud wearing hijab. Wherever I go, I will represent Muslim women. In South Yorkshire, I am the first Pakistani Kashmiri mayor. It is a point of pride. I am absolutely privileged and it is an honour to be in this position.
Allah Azza wa Jal की वजह से, दीन की वजह से और मेरे माँ बाप की दुआ.
So, Rafe, do you think it is acceptable for the mayor of any British town to say that they are representing a country from anywhere around the world?
No, it's not.
Other than Britain. And
it's not to directly attack this councillor, this new mayor's reputation. She seems to be a very decent person from what I can see. But what we're seeing is the disintegration of the United Kingdom, and increasingly it's being replaced by a United Nations. This country is far from becoming socially cohesive through diversity. Diversity is creating ethno-nationalist silos around the country, and that's deeply destructive to our nation. And we're seeing, I'm afraid to say, the sectarianism we associated with Northern Ireland being introduced to the British mainland. Liverpool and Glasgow used to be places where people voted along religious lines. That was thankfully done away with. And yet, thanks to mass immigration, we're seeing that re-imported into this country. And of course, this just follows on from a whole slew of recent other examples of this. Of course, people may remember the Leeds Green Party politician who shouted Allahu Akbar after he was elected. People may remember just now in the recent local elections in Burnley Central East, there was another councillor who was elected on an Islamic agenda and essentially putting foreign cultural practices, wanting to enforce segregation between men and women. So we're seeing essentially the creation of a rival culture to British culture. And it's critically important that we prioritize British culture over minority cultures. And if you really want to be an elected representative, you have to represent all peoples, not prioritize or seem to be beholden to one particular group.
Fahima, this is harmful to British democracy, isn't it?
I think this is democracy at its finest, to be honest, showing that we are not governed by one religion, one faith. And actually, there's strength in that. And the idea that there's a mere presence in office, threatens British values is very un-British, to be honest. She wasn't, talking to the British public. She was talking to a specific channel, which she sort of spoke in a different language because she's bilingual and she has various languages that she can speak. And yes, she's actually, worked in sort of office for many years as a mother of 3 daughters. I feel there's a double standard here that we need to call out. On one hand, people complain that Muslim women are oppressed, don't work, don't contribute to society. And then when there's a Muslim woman that does break those barriers, becomes a mayor, leads charities and serves her community, suddenly that's a problem too. Let's be honest, the issue isn't oppression, it's discomfort with a confident Muslim woman in public life. She is representing the British people. She was elected in 2021 by her constituent, and she's also talking to her constituent, which is also predominantly in that area, which is over 90%, which is British English people that are there. And yes, now she's been elected by her peers, but it shows that at the end of the day, that this is real democracy. And we are having to, understand that when we want integration, it needs to be allowed in whichever form it is, and it's not taken away from British values or culture itself.
This surely is the opposite of integration. Rafe, Fahima said there that we're not governed by one religion, but it seems as if the people of South Yorkshire are being quite explicitly governed by somebody in this who, in this initial address, has quite clearly privileged not just their religion, but also a foreign country. I mean, the address is in Urdu, of course, so it's excluding English people, English speakers who don't understand Urdu. But as Fahima said there, that that she's addressing a specific demographic. It seems that the demographic that she's addressing here are Pakistani Muslims and not her constituents.
And that's the crux of the issue. And this isn't about the fact that she's a Muslim woman. You know, I've been equally vocal about people like, Iqbal Muhammad, the independent Muslim vote MP who has defended cousin marriage, for example. But what we are seeing essentially is the retreat of politics down to ethno-religious lines. And that's deeply divisive for any multiracial society as we are. And as I say, the politics of sectarianism are becoming very much a threat to the security of this nation, to the cohesion of this nation. And it's not also to say that these politicians are necessarily extremists in and of themselves, but by catering to one group and by seeing to be their representative in politics, they're displaying mixed loyalties and they're prioritizing, obviously, their Muslim communities. And it's always in an uncritical way. There's no willingness there seemingly to tackle the dark side of diversity that often finds itself in those communities, the failures of integration, and they essentially enable extremism and segregation and sectarianism and division. The people they represent don't want to be part of Britain, it seems. They want to essentially create a mini version of their homelands. And particularly in the case of this councillor, for example, she's from Rotherham. Rotherham, of course, was at the centre of the rape gang scandal, the greatest scandal of the 21st century. And you would think if she wants to be such a great representative for the peoples of her region, the Pakistani Muslim population, she would have spoken out vocally to distance her community from those atrocities. And yet I found no evidence whatsoever that she's made even one statement about that. And I would think the fact that she has chosen to stay silent on that issue, in essence, to help cover up and protect the Pakistani Muslim communities, reveals that actually when push comes to shove, her priority and the priority of people like her isn't the British people. The first priority is the Pakistani Muslim community.
Fahima, what do you think of those online who have been commenting on this video saying that she's a colonizer and that this is Islamic colonialization of British towns?
I think there's a distinction for people that speak like that, and there's definitely a terminology for it. Because again, it's not just one person's responsibility to call certain things out. We always only report on one side. There were over 200 mosques that actually condemned the grooming gangs. There were many Muslims that speak out, but we're not actually addressing that. It's not her responsibility to speak out and find evidence. She's been working within the community for domestic violence, for women of sexual abuse. There's a lot of things that she's done that's got her to where she is right now. We're not addressing that, and we're just making a lot of assumptions because of a particular faith. When we have the Polish, when we have the Scottish, the Wales, also, yes, it's part of Britain, but they also talk about their community and they actually express themselves, whether it's in their own language, then there's no uproar and outrage. I really do think it is a double standard and hypocrisy, regardless of what everyone's saying right now. And it's only because it's attacking, because it's a Muslim woman. I really do feel that, regardless of what anyone says, because she would not be a representative and speaking. Like I said, she was speaking on a particular channel. There are different channels that are here. She wasn't addressing the community. When she does address the community, it would be in English and it would be for the British society as a whole. There's no way that she would actually come on there and continue her job if she was only addressing one particular community. It's just not the way it goes. It's just that we, put a lens on just one specific kind of area of somebody, and then we just blow it up into saying that it's sectarianism, it's this, that, and the other. When other communities, we talk about it as, cultural sort of like diversity, and we are, praising that. But only when it comes to the Muslim community, it is always an outrage and an uproar. Let's just say maybe we should just call it for what it is. Britain does not want to be a democracy unless you see white, British people that are there in the forefront. Let's just remember that when it comes to Christianity, this particular country had reform and lots of laws, which is is against Christianity in the first place. And culturally Christian that people talk about, at the end of the day, that only includes when it comes to opposing another faith or just Christmas and Easter. I have a Bible with me. Tell me how many people actually has one, owns one, or reads one. That is the faith. That is what Christianity is about. And I'm not even part of that faith, but I respect it. And so there's many Muslim people that are working and doing. They do things exactly according to the law of this land and country. They are elected. They are doing things, not, colonizing, not doing things illegally, not invading. It is with the law of the land, and there's still a problem. That I do not seem to understand. I really don't.
Nobody is denying, of course, that the majority of Muslims in this country are well integrated and are productive members of society. That's to be celebrated. Of course, it's not an overwhelming majority because there is a very sizable minority who hold attitudes, views, and religious extremist beliefs which are completely abhorrent to our culture. We know from polling, 10% of Muslims in this country identify as jihadists and support terrorism, for example. And we've just had a report out from France, from President Macron this week, talking about the Muslim Brotherhood's entryism into politics, into local government, and trying to essentially infiltrate French institutions and slowly push them towards more extremism and more tolerance of extremist Islamic policies and beliefs, and to the adoption of Sharia law in local communities as well. We had a similar report out here in 2015. So there is something wrong and deeply worrying about what's happening within large Muslim enclaves. And we know that segregated communities of Muslims are twice as likely to be extremist as those who aren't in segregated communities. And we have seen in the last election the politics of Pakistan being imported into Britain. We had Labour MPs cowering in their offices, too scared to leave. We had, arson attacks with constituency office of an MP burnt to the ground. MPs putting panic attack buttons in their rooms because of the threat from Islamic extremism, which has become now a political movement. We're seeing it now, of course, with the Muslim vote, etc. That's why this is a very peculiar and particular problem, because Islam also has a political wing as well as a religious wing, and it does pose a threat to the cohesion of this country, particularly, of course, when you see the strife, for example, between Hindus and Muslims as well, as we saw in Leicester. So this is a very real problem, not to mention the corruption that, of course, is linked to a lot of the Red Wall area, the local councils, where we have postal votes, of course. There's Raja Mia, the great whistleblower, has shown how many Muslim communities are actually corruptly faking the votes that are coming on with postal votes. There's a lot of issues here that are linked to the segregation of the Islamic community.
Fahima, surely you can accept that a democracy can't accommodate all cultural diversity, because there are some aspects of certain cultures and the practices and beliefs and traditions of certain communities that are just simply not acceptable for modern Britain. Surely you can accept that there must be some kind of limits on what a democracy can tolerate, that there is a basic British culture to which those who want to participate in democracy and in public office should have to integrate into.
I don't know what you're talking about when it comes to integration, because I see integration just because, people do actually have a certain belief system which is in coherence and cohesion with the actual values of Britain. And you just don't like to see it like that because you're seeing it from a particular group. Extremism exists in all different areas, not just in the Muslim. We see the far right rising, whether it's in Europe and in the UK, but we never speak about that. We also see the rise of Islamophobia. People don't even want to recognize that. But I can see right now that there is a fear, as you mentioned last time, of Muslims that are, whether they are practicing more, whether they are building mosques. It's a capitalistic state. At the end of the day, whoever has the more money and they go through the processes, they will have that. And it's within the law again and the rights. You talk about the extremism. Of course, there's extremism. But for me, no extremism exists in any faith, even if it's hijacked. right? And at the same time, we are not addressing the real issues of the fact that the way in which the law is here, the legislation, and it is actually inclusive of all faiths. There's no such thing as what you're saying that, certain faiths don't have it. Then call yourself, something that's fascism or autocratic or authoritarian, where you just want one particular group to take over another. Your laws do not have that. Your laws are not even in line with Christianity. If you look at whether Britain even is a Christian country, look at what it really actually looks like to be in a Christian country, like the Vatican City, like Poland, where most people actually adhere to it. They don't have laws of, against blasphemy or marriage or even the assisted dying, because that's all against Christianity. So at the end of the day, when you want to talk about it, let's talk about it in real terms and don't confuse things just because you want to, sideline and just put across one particular group, which is, again, like you said, a minority, but it scares you the most because we are actually, people that have a faith that we do follow. And yes, the Pakistani community is the majority. It does not represent all Muslims, and there are variations of it, but majority of them themselves, they are law-abiding citizens within the community. You go into Finchley Road, you go into certain areas, there is only Jews that have their own, kosher meat, they have their own policing, they have their own councils, they have everything, and there is no uproar and there's no outrage, about anything. It's just only when it comes to the Muslim community. We need someone to blame for whether it is any problem, any crime, any sort of discernment. Yes, it's easy to have a target of a Muslim when actually you go into your NHS, you go into majority of professionals, they do actually have a high collaboration when it comes to, or contribution to this country. Majority of the London itself is owned by Qatar Muslims. Majority of people that are even against Islam will go and even live in Dubai, a Muslim country. Why not Europe? Why not anywhere else? At the end of the day, we are not a culture or religion which is not cohesive, which is not of understanding, and we're not of same values. It's only people that want to create divide and hate. That's when they will talk in that kind of rhetoric and propaganda. When actually, if you talk about the faith itself, it has similar values, similar ways, and it's definitely in line with British culture. You want to call about certain individuals? Well, I can do the same on this, for example, extremism when it comes to the white supremacists or the far right or anything like that. And
you've packed an awful lot in there, so we've packed a lot in there, so I want to give Rafe a chance to respond. Rafe, let's just see if you could just tackle the core of that head on. Fahima's characterization of Britain as not being a Christian country, and arguing that Islam is compatible with British democratic culture.
Well, the simple reality is Britain is a Christian country. We have an established church. We have an official national church in the Church of England and in the Church of Scotland. The King, of course, is Supreme Governor of the Church of England and defender of the faith. The sovereign is crowned in a Christian ceremony by the Archbishop. He is anointed as a sacrament akin to joining the priesthood with holy oil. We are, along with Iran and Britain are the only two countries to have clerics in their legislature. We have archbishops in the House of Lords. We are fundamentally a Christian country, and it goes far beyond that, of course, because even if you are an atheist today, if you are a secular liberal Democrat voting atheist, you are going to be somebody who supports the idea of universal human rights, for example. Well, that is a fundamentally Christian concept, the whole idea of the ultimate inherent dignity of the individual. You don't find that in Islamic cultures. You don't find that in fact, in non-Christian cultures. These developed in the Christian concept, and indeed the success of the West has been due in many ways to its fundamental Christian precepts. Our very worldview, the way we perceive the world, the way our institutions perceive the world, the way our government and our politicians see the world is fundamentally rooted in Christianity. And that's why the perception of a Muslim politician in Pakistan will be different to the perception of a British politician in this country. And that's the crux of the issue. The Christian world, and now increasingly the developed world, views the world far differently than you would get in the Islamic world, as we can see quite clearly from the politics that happens in those places. And look, no one is saying at all, of course, that all Muslims are bad at all, and all Islam is not compatible. But there is a very significant problem here that we're afraid to address for fear of being accused of being Islamophobic. I'm afraid the reality is you have 52% of Muslims in this country believe homosexuality should be illegal. It's only 5% in the broader population. 62% want to suppress free speech to stop causing offense to religions. 1/3 of young British Muslims, 16 to 24, believe you should be put to death for apostasy, for leaving the faith. Britain is now the global center of honor killings, of acid attacks rather, but we have honor killings, forced marriage, cousin marriage, child marriage, polygamy. These are all things people are afraid to address because of the issue of Islamophobia. That's not being practiced by the entire Muslim population, but it's very sizable. And always remember, there are 400,000 Muslims in this country, between 350,000 and 400, who identify as being extremists and support terrorism. There are 40,000 jihadis on the terror watch list of MI5. 1 in every 100 Muslims is on the jihadi terror watch list. That's only going to grow exponentially as the Muslim population increases to perhaps under 20% by 2025. So potentially you will have a number of people on the jihadi watch list that's larger than the British Army. The number of people on the jihadi watch list is already larger than the number of Hamas fighters on October the 7th, larger than the size of the ISIS army in Iraq in 2014. These are real issues and real challenges we need to face, not to mention that 40% of the mosques in this country are run by the extremist Deobandi cult, which is what gave birth to the Taliban, and the majority of the prison chaplains who are Muslim in this country belong to this same extremist Deobandi sect. Those are the challenges of Islam that we need to face, and that is in no way a criticism of the well-adjusted Muslims who are an integrated and important part of British society.
Fahima, isn't what Rafe has just described there, in your opinion, a problem for democracy? If you think that democracy ought to be inclusive of everyone, how can a democracy sustain itself against those who, whose cultural or religious beliefs are anti-democratic or do conflict with the values that you yourself are professing?
Well, when it comes to blasphemy laws and things like that, we have to understand, and the things that Rafe has just mentioned, they're all Christian beliefs. It's not just Islamic beliefs. It's just that Christianity, was once a Christian country, and it was defined by the sheikh, which shaped the laws and crowned monarchs and controlled education and punished those who strayed from doctrines and things like that. And the kings ruled by divine right, but people could be jailed or executed for blasphemy. And obviously, think of Reformation when King Henry VIII made himself head of the king of church, not out of spiritual awakening, but to consolidate political power. And that, pivotal moment blurred the lines between religion and state. So whatever you're saying was actually there. It's not just Islam, it's actually Christianity. And then later came the real change of Enlightenment and scientific revolution, which challenged Christians' monopoly on truth. And then the Industrial Revolution, where it was more urbanization, shifting people away from parish life and closer to modern secular thinking. So that's what we have right now. It's not Christianity, it's secular and more sort of like, pluralistic sort of rulings and legislation. And the real turning point in the 20th century was after the 2 world wars, including the Church of England, which declined a lot. And it came with a wave of legal reforms like abortion, legalized in 1960, homosexuality decriminalized in 1967, blasphemy laws abolished in 2008, same-sex marriage legalized in 2014. These weren't Christian-led reforms. They were won by secular campaigns in defiance of traditional Christian teachings. Now, when it comes to, meanwhile, in Britain becoming more diverse, religious, ethically, culturally, multiculturalism has always existed with, since the time where whether it was Britain colonizing or they brought people over here to help them build and have some sort of like way in which after the Second World War, even fighting even in the Second World War. That's why we have such a national fabric, whereas Christians may think that they dominate when actually the Equals Opportunity Act as well has said there's no real sort of like religion that actually rules, or none. It's everyone is seen to be equal. So today,
Rafe.
Britain is a secular democracy with Christian heritage and not a Christian country in law and in values or lived experience. And the distinction needs to be said when it comes to that. And at the end of the day, when you're talking about all these research and about the watch list and things like that. Like I said, there's even a huge amount more, whether it's the far right, that has been reported to prevent than anywhere else.
Fahima,
It's
let's
exactly the same.
let's put this.
When
Let's
it
put this.
comes to research and when it comes to sort of numbers, if you want to put a sort of like a magnifying glass on one particular group, it's going to sound and scare everyone so that we are.
Fahima,
I'm sorry.
let's put this to Rafe.
Just
Fahima,
as a point,
Fahima, let's just put this. Let's just put this to Rafe, because Rafe.
If I could just make one point of clarification: 90% of the people on the terror watch list are Muslim. 90%. Right? This is not about equals. The far right is a minnow, is a molehill compared to the Islamist mountain.
Rafe, you're a historian. What do you make of Fahima's historical account there? She took us through the full sweep almost of British history. What do you make of that?
Well, I would say the fundamental point, of course, is that, yes, Christianity did have a reformation. We did go through the Enlightenment too. And the fact is, Islam hasn't done that. And that's where a lot of this comes down to, because, of course, the idea of a lot of extremists is, of course, to create a caliphate and to introduce Sharia law, essentially to go back to 8th century Islam when everything was perfect. And that was the ideal. And nothing is able to actually surpass what Islam had achieved in the 8th century or whatever. And until Islam can have its reformation and can actually benefit from the Enlightenment and go through those stages, as we did hundreds of years ago, Islam is not going to be, in my view, a religion that is able to embrace the principles and the compassion and the tolerance that Christianity has. And of course, let's remember, it was the Christian evangelical movement of the 19th century that led the cause for the abolition of slavery, for example. It was slavery is universal. It was the first time in human history that as a society had decided to make itself deliberately poorer in order to advance a moral good, enforcing an end to the slave trade on the seas, for example, with the West Africa Squadron. And it was the Christian evangelical movement, just a couple of miles from where I'm sitting here, is Clapham, where these chaps, that was unique to Britain and to the Protestant countries, it has to be said. And that also, you see that in terms of colonization, of course, you had people going around with the imperialists, but then you also had Christians who were there to do good deeds, for example. And those values that we regard as being intrinsically British and Western are all rooted in the Bible. Empathy, compassion, tolerance, freedom, equality. And those were values that we actually exported around the world. So places like Japan now have those values because they were part of Christianity's global reach. Now, look, my argument is that Britain is a Christian country. That's very different from saying Britain is a religious country. I would be defying the statistics if I was to say that Britain is overwhelmingly religious and that the indigenous population are at the church all the time. My point is that all of our worldviews have been shaped by Christianity if you were brought up in Britain and the West. That's why you have even dedicated atheists like Richard Dawkins now saying that he is a cultural Christian. He cannot escape his heritage and the way he brought up. It is the gift to the world of Christianity that it was able to develop in the West, the most advanced and the most unique civilization in the world, a civilization that has had unparalleled good and fundamentally created the modern world. And we should all be grateful for that.
Rafe, can I put just one point of Fahima's to you specifically, to get your view on whether you think it's historically accurate to say that we were ruled by the divine right of kings? Because my understanding of British history is actually that constitutionally speaking, we were quite unique, and that Christianity itself, unlike Islam, does carve out this space that became secularism. We might call it secularity. But that is something that is actually uniquely Christian. And because it's become so much a part of a sort of de-Christianized atmosphere, perhaps people don't recognize that that is actually something that is uniquely part of our Christian history.
Well, the divine right is part of our. Is that what you're saying?
That in the British Constitution, I'm thinking Fortescue, for example, that we didn't have the absolute rule that the French had. That there was that our Constitution developed in a particular way that perhaps maybe many people don't necessarily realise that that is something that has its roots in English Christianity.
Yeah, that's very right. Yeah, so I mean, the whole principle of the English monarchy, of course, was of the rule by consent from the Witenagemot, which were the group of noblemen who would essentially bring together to decide on who would be the sovereign. It was only later on that we got the notion of the divine right of kings. But the key element of all of that, of course, is that it's about a covenant, and this goes back to the New Testament and to the kings of Israel. And the idea is that there is a covenant between God, between the people, and between the sovereign. And each promises, in essence, to do what they can to support the other. And that unique nature of the covenant, which is fundamentally Judeo-Christian, is unique to European monarchies, and has placed upon the monarch that very Christian notion of having an intrinsic duty to look after their peoples and to improve their lot and improve their lives, and not to essentially be in it simply for themselves. And that's, I think, something that is very special to Christian monarchies.
Fahima, would you say, listening to Rafe, what Rafe has said there, that actually, Britain does have something more than just multiculturalism, more than just pure tolerance for people to integrate into, that actually there is a historical background there that is distinctively Christian, and that's something that should be respected by people, particularly who are in public office and are participating actively as representatives in our democracy?
You know what? When it comes to modern British values, they're mainly post-Christian. Tolerance, equality, freedom of belief. These are they're not uniquely Christian. These are values found in many faiths and in none. Okay, you can deny and shake your head on that. You don't know the Quran. You only know of the ones that, pick on certain things, which we can do the same on the Bible, the Torah, and the actual Quran on certain things, which are quite extreme. And there are cultural beliefs and the way in which society lives, which is nothing to do with the religion itself. We have laws in this country and values and the tolerance, which we are all abiding by. Yes, in every crate, you're going to find some rotten apples, and you're going to obviously exacerbate them, certain groups to make it like as if they're the worst ones and we're the minorities that are actually causing the problems, when actually it's the complete opposite. Because if you were to think about even the minorities that bring so much to this country in such a small amount, that'll be something that no one wants to talk about, whether it comes to the actual, like I said, the contribution and the actual living every day amongst our neighbors and actually having the same values as Christians to look after thy neighbors. Even it's so unchristian the way in which the politics is run today when it comes to the hostile ways in which we look at immigration and wanting to see them as all criminals. And when it comes to the Pope and Christianity and priests that actually, are completely opposing all of this. And yeah, even if you want to say culturally Christian or whatever it may be, that again, it's more ceremonial. When it comes to real values, and if you really understood religion, not just your own, and only want to do that, it actually encompasses all faiths with the same values, regardless of even if people and some do not follow, they are dealt with. We are in a country with a justice system, which again, even within my faith, we have to follow the law of the land, and the one that doesn't, they have to be punished accordingly. And they are. And there's no two-tier system here, because I see just as much going on from, the left or the right when it comes to the actual justice system, when it comes to, putting people in their places, arresting and whatever it may be. And we also have to adjust it with case-by-case studies when it comes to that. But I just feel, again, there is just a huge kind of like, uproar and outrage when it comes to people that are showing their own diversity of their own identities in line with British values. And again, speaking a different language, looking slightly different, having certain things that may not be for everyone, but also, talking to certain communities, which is part of their constituents, like a Polish would, like a Scottish or a Welsh would, then again, it's no problem, but only because it's Muslims. And they cannot come here and actually say that they want to rule or invade, or no one's trying to do that. We are just trying to live in line. We have the same opportunities, the same rules, the same sort of like ways in which of getting our education and developing ourselves and having the same opportunities. There's no such thing as we are taking over or doing certain things out of line. It's just that if certain people are able, like a Muslim woman, to be in a council and be a member and actually have the education and do it the correct way, what is the problem with that? There should be more British people then that are actually taking on these opportunities. Why are they not educating themselves? Why are they not going into higher education? Why are they not taking those positions? They are huge in numbers. They're huge in the same opportunities and values. Maybe that's what you need to address, not the ones that come here and try to abide and live in the same way. We are all doing exactly the same thing and we have the same opportunities. If other people rise and shine and do something better and do the exact same thing, and they are in power or position, they are not there to take over. They're doing it in exactly the same way as anybody else would. So again, that is a problem for me to see it in the way that you see it, but not the way that everyone else would see it.
A final word to you, Rafe.
Well, I would say for the third time, this is not an attack on the broader Muslim population, but what this is about is the increased sectarianism of British politics and the fact that the increasing rise of the Muslim vote, whether it be Muslim MPs or Muslim councillors, is enabling sectarianism. It's enabling division. It's enabling segregation. There is a reluctance to address or tackle the real challenges that I've already identified that exist within those communities. They are suppressed. That's one of the reasons we see the Labour Party, for example, so reluctant to have a national inquiry, trying to brush it under the carpet with these council-led inquiries, knowing that those councils, so beholden are they to the Muslim vote, won't actually do a proper investigation. And I'm afraid what we're going to see increasingly is an introduction of the politics of Pakistan to this country. More violence, more aggression, more intimidation. We saw it with the gangs of Muslims outside a Birmingham school, upset with the school curriculum there. We see it in attempts to pressure the Labour Party to pass a blasphemy law. We see it, of course, Britain is now the Western leader of Sharia law, and Britain sends out Sharia instructors to other countries right now. We're at a critical point in our history. The Muslim population is going to rise up to around 12 million potentially by 2050. And we need to make sure that we have a policy which will enable us to integrate those communities and deal with the more radical elements, which are only going to become a greater and greater threat. We can't be afraid to discuss this. We mustn't be silenced. We mustn't be accused of Islamophobia for trying to address, arguably, I would say, the greatest challenge this country faces, and that's the rising presence of a fifth column which seeks to overthrow our institutions and our structures, or essentially just create a separate state within the United Kingdom.
Thank you so much, Rafe, Heydel-Mankoo and Fahima Mahmood. And do let us know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you can stay up to date with all of GBN Originals content.